The Godown is still cool from the night, and the air smells of river damp, hemp dust, and weak tea poured into a small clay cup. Before sunrise has fully reached the Hooghly, you step onto the warehouse floor with a tally slate under one arm and a bale hook hanging from your hand. This is quiet work, but not simple work, because raw jute must be read almost the way a clerk reads a ledger, by color, length, softness, and the truth hidden under the outer layer. The bales arrive from the eastern districts bound in coarse ties, their surfaces pale enough to promise a good morning's sorting. You wrap a cloth over your nose, cut the first twine, and ease the packed fiber open with the practiced patience of someone who knows that appearances are often arranged. At first, there is the usual rustle, the dry drag of stalk against stalk, and the soft scrape of loose strands falling to the floorboards. Then your fingers find a change in the bundle, darker fiber underneath, heavier with damp, rougher at the root, not quite matching what the outside claimed to be. So, instead of letting your hands move on by habit, you slow down and begin the day's work more carefully than anyone expected. And in that slow, careful sorting, the whole life of a 1920s Calcutta Jute Godown starts to come into view. The first thing you do is not speak. You hold the opened fiber in both hands, and you let your thumb travel along the length of it once more, slowly, as if touch might correct what sight has already said. The outer layer is fair enough, pale gold in the low light, dry on the surface, almost silky where the better strands were pressed outward for inspection. But beneath that neat face, the bundle turns uneven. There is a darker brown cast near the root ends, and a faint coolness that does not belong in well-kept fiber. When you lift a handful and give it the small shake that sorters use without thinking, the strands do not fall apart cleanly. They cling. That is often the first sign. Not always cheating, not always neglect, but something. Late drying, poor storage, careless pressing in a village yard where the air stayed wet too long after retting. You look at the bale mark again. The paint is already half rubbed by travel, but the district sign is clear enough, and so is the broker's chalk note asking for same-day grading. That makes the morning narrower. If this lot is meant to be read quickly and sent onward before noon, then every doubtful handful matters more than usual. You set one little tuft aside on the floorboard by your left foot. It is a small action, easy to miss, but it changes the morning at once. Now you are no longer simply opening bales. You are keeping evidence. Across the Godown, another man drags a stack hook over timber with a sound like a tired hinge. Somewhere near the doorway, a tea seller calls softly, and clay cups click against each other in his tray. The room is still in that hour before full labor, when voices stay low and everyone seems to believe the day may pass without incident. You cut the next tie. The twine parts with a dry snap, and the bale eases open at the seam. Again, the outer surface looks respectable. Again, your fingers go inward. Again, the story changes under the skin. This time, the false neatness is even clearer. The top layer has been packed with long, brighter strands laid almost like a cover cloth, while the middle is shorter, duller, mixed with coarse ends and specked with bits of bark. You pull one bundle free and bend it lightly. Good jute has a certain compliance. It yields, but keeps its line. This lot feels tired. Not rotten, not useless, but too soft in one place and too harsh in another, as though several grades have been persuaded into one body for the sake of a better price. By now, the progression has begun. You are less than an hour into the shift, and an urgent consignment has already become suspect. That changes not only your hands, but your pace. A jute sorter in a Calcutta Godown is expected to move with calm efficiency, not with drama. The work is repetitive by design. Bales come in from river steamers, country boats, carts, and rail. They are unloaded, stacked, marked, opened, sampled, sorted, retied, and sent toward mills or brokers' stores. Most mornings are made of comparison, one handful against another, one district's crop against last week's lot, one broker's reputation against what the fiber can honestly bear. You are not a clerk. though figures follow your judgment. You are not a mill spinner, though the yarn will later reveal whether your hands were right. Your task belongs to the middle space. You read raw matter before machines do, and because so much depends on quick appearances in the jute trade, the person who reads beneath the surface can slow an entire chain of business with nothing more than a doubtful touch. You crouch beside the opened bales and begin laying out separate little heaps, one for the outer dressing, one for the darker middle, one for the root-heavy refuse that ought never to have been hidden among better lines. You do it quietly, not because secrecy is possible in a warehouse, but because noise too early in the day has a way of making everyone stubborn. The tally slate rests against your knee. On it, in chalk already dusted by your thumb, are the incoming marks, the broker's initials, and the rough count of pieces expected before breakfast. You add a short notation beside the first 2 bales. Mixed. Then again, beside the third mark as it opens the same way, mixed inside. By the 4th bale, the pattern is firm enough that you feel the first small pressure of decision. You could average the lot. Men do, sometimes. A consignment with irregular packing can be judged by its general level, downgraded slightly, and moved on before the Godown clogs with loose fiber and argument. That choice would keep the carts moving. It would please the broker's clerk when he arrives. It would also leave the false outer packing half rewarded. You hold the knife in one hand and look along the row of bales. Their surfaces are all similar, pale, tidy, promising. Too similar, perhaps, as if they had been dressed with unusual care for one buyer in one hurry. So you make the quieter, harder choice. You decide that no bale from this mark will pass on surface reading alone. Each one must be cut deeper, opened wider, and judged through the middle. That decision is not announced with any speech. It lives first in your body. You set down the good pace of a routine sorter and take up the slower rhythm of a doubtful one. Soon the nearest handler notices. He is moving empty ties toward the wall, barefoot on dusty planks, and he pauses long enough to watch you pull the center from a 5th bale. "Still on that lot?" he asks. You nod. "Bad mix." He grunts in the way men do when they understand trouble without wishing to stand too near it. Then he goes on. The Godown itself is a kind of long-breathing animal at this hour. Its brick walls still hold some night coolness. High openings near the roof let in bands of thin morning light, and with them the distant sounds of the city beginning, tram bells farther off, crows in the lane, river calls traveling inland over damp air. The floor smells of old fiber, timber, rope, sweat dried into cloth, and the faint mineral scent that comes from goods brought up river. In such a place, a skilled sorter learns by accumulation. You learn that color alone lies. So does softness, taken by itself. A pale strand may be underretted and weak. A darker one may still spin well if it is long, clean, and strong enough in the hand. You look for gloss, but not too much. Tenderness, but not decay. Long line, but not if the root ends are thick and woody. No single sign decides a bale. That is why this work appears simple only to people who have never done it. You shake out another handful. Dust rises in a fine brown cloud and catches the slanted light. A mildew fleck shows near the tied end. Not broad staining, not a whole spoiled section, only enough to suggest that the inside stayed warm and damp for a time before pressing. That matters. Mills buying for better spinning counts do not want surprises. Hidden moisture alters weight. Root content lowers yield. Mixed quality forces adjustments all the way down the line, from batching to spinning to the final complaint sent back through trade channels weeks later. None of that is visible to a casual eye. It begins here, with your fingers in a warehouse before breakfast. You keep sorting. By now there are 7 opened bales in partial disorder around you, and the little heaps on the floor have become clear categories. The best outer layers form a pale ridge nearest the wall. The middling inner fiber lies in a broader brown-gold spread. The harsh ends, barky scraps, and dampened clumps gather in a rough pile that says more than any argument could. One of the tallymen comes over at last. He carries his slate under his arm the way a schoolmaster might carry a book, keeping it clean from dust as long as possible. He looks down at the floor, then at you. Why are they opened this far, he asks. Because they're packed two ways, you say. He bends, pinches a few strands from the good heap, then from the darker one. His face does not change much, but his silence does. He has felt it too. Not enough to grade for himself, perhaps, but enough to know the lot is no longer ordinary. He glances toward the stacked remainder. Same mark? All from the same lot so far. He scratches something brief onto his slate. That is another development. Once a tallyman writes a note, the matter begins to move out of hands and into record. The Godown may still be half quiet, but the consignment has started to acquire a paper shadow. You return to work before talk thickens around you. That is often the best way. In jute sorting, certainty comes less from speeches than from repetition. One doubtful bale can be a packing mistake. 3 may be carelessness. 5 in succession begin to look deliberate. You open the 8th. The outer skin is nearly beautiful. Long, light strands combed into flatness by pressure and arrangement, almost fit for a broker's sample table. But the center is shorter and warmer in smell. A stale, closed smell. Stored too close, perhaps? Not soaked, not ruined, only held badly after drying, where the night's moisture could creep back in and sit. You pull free a twist of root ends and lay it with the rest. Now the evidence has weight. The nearby handlers have begun working around your growing spread of fiber instead of through it. That is never a good sign for speed. One man hauling ties mutters that the floor will vanish if every bale today is opened like a marriage trunk. Another laughs softly, though not unkindly. They know what is coming if you insist on full reading. More labor, more dust, more delay. Yet none of them tells you to stop. That, too, is part of warehouse life. A skilled sorter may be low in noise, but he is not low in consequence. You pause long enough to accept a clay cup of tea from the cellar at the door. It is thin, overboiled, sweetened just enough to leave a film on the tongue. You drink without removing the cloth from around your neck for long. The cup warms your hand. The floor cools your bare soles through worn leather sandals. The tea seller looks at the opened bales and says, almost to himself, "Long morning." You hand back the cup. Looks that way. Then you kneel again. There is comfort in method, even when method reveals trouble. You hook the next bale, cut the tie, ease apart the packed flank, lift the first handful, test the line between finger and thumb, snap a stalk lightly near the root to hear whether it breaks clean or dull. Shake free dust, watch what falls, smell for damp, glance for stain, sort, set aside, note, repeat. The body begins to take on the rhythm that the mind has already chosen. And as the light strengthens through the high openings, the room loses its early softness. Heat begins to gather above the planks. Voices rise half a degree. Outside, cartwheels grind in the lane and someone shouts for space by the side entrance. Inside, your work area has become impossible to mistake. What was one urgent lot is now a field of opened proof. A senior measurer, older than the tally clerks and slower in his movements, comes over from the far side of the Godown where another consignment was being checked. He does not ask questions first. He kneels, selects from each heap, rubs strands against his palm, and lifts one small damp cluster to his nose. Then he looks at the bale marks lined up on your slate. All one district run, he says. So far. He touches the pale outer layer with the back of his finger. Dressed. It is only one word, but it settles heavily. Dressed means improved in appearance, sometimes honestly by careful handling and neat pressing, sometimes less honestly by arranging better fiber where buyers will look first. He picks up a rooty bundle from the darker heap and lets it fall back. No trust bale by bale, he says. That is the confirmation you needed. Not because you doubted your own hand, but because a morning dispute becomes easier to carry when another experienced man has felt the same fault. He stands, dusts his palms, and tells the tallyman to hold the outgoing note for that mark. There is your first real consequence. The consignment will not move as planned. Not yet. A carter waiting near the entrance asks why his loading count has changed. No one answers him fully. A handler sent to fetch fresh ties returns and finds he now needs more than expected. The urgency that was supposed to shorten the morning has instead spread through it, slower and wider, like damp through tightly packed fiber. You keep working because the only honest way forward is through the pile itself. Still, with each bale you open, the choice before the Godown becomes clearer. Either the lot is averaged and passed on with a reduced grade, or every suspect bale is broken fully and sorted clean into new classifications. The first saves time. The second saves accuracy, and by the look already settling over the floorboards, accuracy is beginning to demand space. Near mid-morning, the Sardar finally notices the delay in earnest. He comes in from the brighter yard, where men have been unloading from a cart, and the change in light makes him squint for a moment at the spread around you. He is not a loud man by habit, which is why people listen when he speaks. "What happened here?" he asks. The tallyman starts to answer, but the senior measurer lifts a hand and lets you speak for your own work. Mixed packing through the line, you say. Good outer cover, poorer inside. Damp in parts. Root-heavy sections. Same mark on the lot. The Sardar looks at the floor, then at the unopened row. How many checked? 8 fully enough to know the pattern. More partly, he kneels with surprising care for a man in charge of men and cargo, takes a handful from the pale heap, then from the middling one, and finally from the harsh reject pile. He says nothing for several breaths. That silence gives the answer shape before words do. If he tells you to average it and move on, the whole room will exhale and return to routine. If he orders the lot broken open, the morning changes completely. He turns the darker fiber over once in his hand, and a small dust of dry mud falls to the plank beside his knee. Not much. Just enough to show that river mud, careless drying ground or dirty handling has followed the jute farther than it should have. He wipes his fingers on his cloth. Keep those separate, he says first. Then he looks at the remaining stack. Open 3 more before I decide. That is not the end of the matter, but it is enough to hold the line in suspense. You nod, reach for the next bale, and set the hook into the tie as the room begins, very quietly, to arrange itself around a longer day. The 9th bale opens harder than the others, as if the pressure inside has settled crookedly during the journey. You slide the knife along the tie, pull back the wrapping fiber, and feel at once that the top layer has been laid with unusual care. The strands are longer there, and cleaner, and they sit flat in a way village pressing rarely achieves by accident. Underneath, the middle breaks that neat promise again. There is more short fiber here, and more unevenness, with thick root ends lying across better lines as though someone had hidden one small harvest inside another. You lift a twist and bend it near your thumb. It does not spring back with the dry resilience of good line. It folds too easily, then rasps against itself as you separate the strands. The senior measurer watches without speaking. The Sardar remains crouched beside the earlier heaps, one forearm resting on his knee, looking not only at what you pull out, but at how often the same pattern returns. That matters in a warehouse. One bale can be excused. A pattern has to be managed. You place the pale outer dressing on the good heap, though now even the good heap looks less trustworthy than it did an hour ago. So much of it belongs only to the surface. The middling pile thickens. The rough reject pile grows outward in a crescent on the floorboards. When you shake the center loose, a little thread of dry mud falls again, not enough to make a spectacle, enough to say the jute came in dirty and stayed that way. The Sardar reaches and pinches the short inner fiber between finger and nail. Too much difference, he says. No one answers him. You have already cut the next tie. The 10th bale gives almost the same account, though this one carries a warmer smell as soon as the seam opens. Not a sharp smell, not rot. Only that close, stale odor of fiber pressed before it had fully forgotten the wet. Jute has its own language when it has been handled badly. If retting was uneven, the stems separate reluctantly. If drying was rushed, the inside stays cool and heavy long after the outside seems fair. If the bundles lay in a low shed through damp nights, they gather a sleepy softness that mills will notice once the machines begin to pull. You find all three signs in one handful. By then, men at the far end of the Godown have stopped pretending this is someone else's concern. They continue their own tasks, but they look over between motions with that sideways attention workers use when the routine nearest them has started to tilt. A carter comes in to ask whether the marked lot will be ready for weighing before noon. The tallyman says, "Not yet," and writes something else on his slate. The carter mutters under his breath and goes back toward the yard. You open the 11th bale. This one is the clearest of all. The outside is almost handsome pale gold and loosely lustrous where the strands catch the growing light. Inside, the better fiber gives way in layers, and below that lies a broad section of common cut, shorter, darker, rough at the root, with scattered bark and one patch faintly stained from old mildew. You do not need to say anything. The Godown can see it now. The Sardar exhales once, slow through his nose. Then he rises, dusts his palms, and looks along the unopened row. "Break the whole marked lot," he says. That is the moment the day shifts from suspicion into labor. No one argues out loud. The decision is too practical for that. Once the order is given, men begin adjusting themselves to it the way furniture is shifted around a larger crate. A handler is sent for more floor space near the side wall. Another is told to bring fresh ties and spare cloth bands. The tallyman wipes a place clean on his slate and starts a new line of notation for reopened bales. The senior measurer nods once, as though he expected no other result. And you, who made the trouble simply by trusting your hands, return to the stack and keep cutting. A whole consignment open for resorting is a different creature from a morning's ordinary sorting. Ordinary sorting has a rhythm almost like sweeping a room. You test, classify, move on. Full regrading is wider and slower. It fills the floor, it multiplies categories. It asks every hand nearby to stop thinking in single bales and start thinking in heaps. Weights, samples, and eventual destinations. The bales that looked so tidy in stack become an untidy field once their bindings are cut. Loose fiber spills in fans and folds. Outer layers slide apart from middling sections. Hidden damp clings in pockets. Bits of bark and root gather where they are shaken free. The floor takes on that soft rustling sound of massed jute being moved by many hands at once. You have heard it before. Not often. Enough to know that once it starts, there is no quick return to neatness. The Godown feels warmer already. The day's heat has begun to settle into the bricks, and the air under the high roof grows heavier with dust. Somewhere above, a ceiling fan turns with more noise than breeze. It moves slowly, like a thought arriving late. You pull the cloth higher over your mouth and go on. Each opened bale has to be read in parts now, not glanced at, not judged from one edge. The better outer fiber is stripped away and laid aside according to line, color, and cleanliness. The middling body is sorted separately, because some of it may still sell well enough for coarser spinning if kept honest. The root-heavy and stained material must be rejected from the better heaps before it can contaminate them by touch and sight. You work quickly but not fast. There is a difference. Fast hands make mixed heaps. Quick hands do not waste motion. A younger worker is sent to assist you, little more than a boy by the look of him. With narrow shoulders and a cloth tied carelessly at the waist, he has carried bales before, and cut ties, but his sorting hand is not yet formed. He watches your piles for a moment, uncertain where to place what he lifts. You show him with very little talk. This one, feel here, you say, guiding his fingers to the line of the better strand. Long, even, clean at the root. Keep with the pail, then you pick up another. Now this, shorter, harsher. See the thick end and the stain, middling or lower. He nods too quickly. You hand him both again. No, not see first, feel first. That is one of the quiet truths of this work. Color can mislead the inexperienced. Touch does not lie as easily. You tell him to pinch lightly, then slide his thumb down the fiber, listening with his skin for smoothness, catch, softness, strength. Jute sorting is often described in trade papers as though it were a matter of grade names and Bale marks. In the Godown, it lives in fingers. The names come later. The papers come after. The real judgment happens in this close, repetitive contact between hand and raw plant. Most of the raw jute passing through Calcutta in the 1920s has traveled a long way before reaching your floor. It was grown in the wet districts eastward, in Bengal lowlands where the monsoon left the fields heavy and the rivers made transport possible. The crop was cut, bundled and retted in water. Ponds, channels, backwaters, slow streams, until the bark loosened and the fibers could be stripped from the stem. Then it was washed, dried, gathered into bundles, pressed, sold, resold, and sent toward market. At every stage, quality could improve or decline. Good retting made cleaner separation, bad retting left harshness or weakness. Proper drying preserved color and feel. Careless storage invited damp back into the heart of the bundles. By the time the jute reached the city, the village work was already written into it. You were reading that distant labor with your hands, long after the farmers and pressers had finished theirs. The younger worker tries again. This time he places a handful correctly. You nod, and that is enough encouragement for him. Nearby, two handlers drag another bale into the growing work area and cut the ties under your instruction. The twine springs free with a dry crack. A cloud of fine fiber dust lifts and hangs in the light. Someone coughs. Someone else laughs once and says they will all be chewing jute before the day is done. It is not a bitter joke, just the warehouse way of accepting a task too large to wish away. By late morning, the floor is no longer organized by incoming stack, but by the truth that stack contained. Pale better line lies in several low ridges. Middling fiber spreads in broad areas of brown gold and dull straw. The reject heap sits rough and ugly near the wall, with rooty ends sticking out in every direction like broken brushes. Samples from doubtful portions have been set on cloths for later inspection by the broker's man. Fresh tally marks multiply. The original bale count begins to lose importance. What matters now is what can be salvaged from the opened lot. The Sardar makes his rounds through the rearranged space, checking that passageways are still clear enough for men to move with loads. He tells one carter to stand down until the regrading is finished. He tells another to carry a message to the office that the urgent consignment will not leave on its old schedule. Business in Calcutta's jute trade runs on paper as much as muscle, and paper dislikes uncertainty. An altered note at noon can become an argument by afternoon in an office half a mile away. But here on the floor, the argument remains simple. The fibers are either what they claim to be, or they are not. A clerk from the broker arrives sooner than anyone would like. He is dressed more neatly than the laboring men, in a light coat, already wilting with heat, and he steps carefully around the open spread of fiber, as if the disorder itself were offensive. His first look goes not to the heaps, but to the broken bales. That tells you something. He was expecting dispatch, not examination. "Why has this lot been held?" he asks. The tallyman begins to answer, but the senior measurer says, "Ask the sorter." So the clerk turns to you. You are kneeling in dust, with bits of jute clinging to your forearms and cloth damp at the neck. You hold up one pale handful from the outer dressing and one darker handful from the middle. "Because these came from the same bale," you say. He takes the first, rubs it, nods as if satisfied. Then he takes the second, and his expression narrows. "It varies," he says, choosing a small word for a larger fault. "It varies through the lot," you reply. He glances at the samples laid aside. "How many bales checked?" "Enough to break them all." The clerk does not like that answer, though he knows by looking around that the decision has already moved beyond him. He asks whether the lot cannot simply be passed at an averaged grade. The senior measurer answers before you need to. No trust in surface. If one mark sells, all must read true. That is the heart of it. Calcutta's jute markets depend on trust, stitched together from many small judgments. Growers trust local buyers to pay according to quality. Brokers trust godowns to classify honestly. Mills trust that a marked bale will resemble the sample that spoke for it. If too many layers of false appearance creep in, the trade grows expensive in a different way, not only in money lost, but in time spent checking what ought to have been plain. The clerk looks unhappy, but not surprised enough to suggest innocence. That is worth noticing. He kneels and picks through one of the middling heaps himself. He is not practiced. His fingers move too much, searching for one decisive sign, while the real verdict lies in accumulation. Still, even he can feel the difference between outer line and hidden center. "What do you call it?" he asks at last. You answer carefully. "Not one grade, better covering over common body. Some damp, some root heavy, some fit for middling line if separated." The clerk stares a moment longer, then stands and asks for samples to be sent to the office. The tallyman says they are already being set aside. That answer irritates him, because it means the Godown is ahead of his objections. He wipes his forehead, leaves a message that the broker will want a written account, and goes out the way he came, stepping around loose fiber with less dignity than before. When he is gone, the room exhales a little. Not because his visit solved anything, because it confirmed that the reopening will stand. Now the labor can proceed without pausing every few minutes for approval from elsewhere. You return to the heaps. The younger worker has begun to improve. He no longer reaches first for color. He tests line and softness, and only then looks. Once, he places a handsome pale bundle with the best heap. You take it back and show him the hidden weakness in the lower stem where the retting has left it tender and over soft. "Looks better than it is," you say. He nods. That is the lesson of the day, and perhaps of the trade. Things look better than they are, until someone keeps touching past the surface. By noon, the Godown carries the full mood of delay. The coolness of dawn is gone. The floor has warmed under bare feet and sandal soles. The smell of dust is thicker, mixed now with sweat, old rope, hot brick, and the faint sweetness that raw jute releases when much of it is disturbed at once. Outside, the lane is brighter and louder. Inside, the work has become strangely more focused. When men accept that a delay is real, they often settle. Complaining takes energy that sorting still requires. So the noise drops into a lower register. Fewer questions, more rustle, more breathing, more little sounds of hands at work. This is when the craft shows itself most plainly. You sort not only by broad grade, but by all the small distinctions mills care about and outsiders rarely see. Long line is not the same as glossy line. A bundle may be clean but weak, another may be darker but stronger. Some fibers are fine and soft enough for better yarns if mixed carefully, others are fit only for coarser cloth, sacking, backing, rope, or any use where beauty matters less than volume. The city around you is full of industry that will eventually use these distinctions without ever naming the man who noticed them first. Jute in the 1920s is called the golden fiber by merchants and newspaper writers, but on the floor it is less poetic and more exact. It is rough against the skin, it catches under nails, it leaves dust at the wrists, and yet there is beauty in a clean heap, well sorted, in the way a pale line can lie smooth and parallel after being shaken free of poorer matter. You think in heaps now, not hours. A full bale is brought, opened, and fed into categories. Another follows. Then another. The original shape of the consignment disappears. Soon no one could rebuild it as it was. That is the irreversible part. Once a marked lot is fully broken and its honesty challenged, the seller's first arrangement has no power anymore. The floor tells a new truth. The clerks must write to that truth. The broker must price to it. The mills will receive not what was sent in appearance, but what has survived in fact. This is not a dramatic kind of power. It is a quiet one. A sorter's refusal to look away changes prices without ever raising his voice. At last the meal break comes, though not cleanly. There is no bell, only the gradual realization that the body is slowing and men are glancing toward their cloth bundles and tin carriers. You sit on an upturned timber near the wall, keeping some distance from the reject heap, because its damp smell has grown stronger in the heat. Your food is simple: rice pressed into a compact mass, a little salt, perhaps lentils carried from home, perhaps a scrap of pickle if the week has been kind. The younger worker eats nearby with the greedy speed of youth, until the dust on his fingers makes him stop and wipe them on a rag first. Across from you, a handler drinks water from a brass lota and says, "This one lot has eaten half the day." The senior measurer replies, "Better this day than 10 complaints next week." No one disputes him. That is how consequence sounds in a Godown. Not grand, only practical. A bad lot passed too easily does not vanish. It travels. It reaches a mill. The spinning room notices. The output changes. Someone counts waste or breakage or uneven draw. The broker hears from the buyer. Letters move back through offices. Samples are compared. Blame settles where records say it may. Better, then, to let the trouble stop here on the floor, while it can still be held in the hand. You finish eating and sit for a few breaths with your back against the wall. The fan overhead turns and turns. Its shadow passes slowly over the open heaps. The younger worker asks whether all jute comes in mixed like this. You tell him no. Most lots vary a little, because fields vary and village pressing is never perfect. But this lot was arranged. That word interests him. He asks whether the growers did it. You shrug. Maybe a village buyer, maybe a small middle trader, maybe men pressing in haste for a favorable sale. Maybe no fraud at all in the grand sense, only that old chain of carelessness where each person smooths over one fault and sends it onward. In such trades, intention is often harder to prove than effect. What matters to the floor is what arrives. The break ends as quietly as it began. Men rise, cloths are shaken out, water is finished. The tallyman checks his notes against the open spread, then calls for fresh chalk. You stand, flex your fingers once, and step back into the field of fibre. Afternoon in a Calcutta Godown has a slower pulse. The light comes in whiter and flatter. The heat settles lower. Voices soften not from peace, but from conservation. Work still has to be done, and the body begins choosing which movements deserve breath. The fan continues overhead. Another one at the far end starts after a hard pull on its switch, then wobbles into motion with a faint metallic complaint. Their breeze is thin, but even thin moving air matters when dust hangs this close. You return to finer work now. The broad truth of the lot has been established. What remains is precision. The middling heaps must be separated more carefully, because not all lesser fibre is the same. Some of it can still serve good use if kept free from the dampest and harshest portions. You show the younger worker how to make narrower distinctions. Not all common line belongs together, you say. Look, this one is short but sound. This one is soft but too tender. This one has root, but the upper length is usable if trimmed. He listens more slowly than before. His hands begin to imitate your economy. That is how skill passes in such places. Not by lectures. By standing near someone who wastes no motion, you kneel by a broad spread of middling jute and work through it handful by handful. There is a patience in this that outsiders rarely imagine. They think of warehouses as blunt places, all noise and lifting. But there are long stretches of trade that depend on small, repeated acts of discrimination. You are not merely separating good from bad. You are deciding what each part can become. For spinning, mills prefer line that is reasonably uniform in length and strength. Too much root thickens the batch and lowers quality. Hidden damp changes weight and feel. If the batch goes to a spinning room with too much of either, the machines have to make up for what the fields and yards did not settle. That is why your sorting hand has to think ahead, past the Godown, past the brokers, all the way to the drawing frames and spools in a mill you may never see. You lift one bundle, Strip away the lower coarse inch with your knife and lay the upper portion on a salvage heap. The younger worker watches, then tries the same motion on another handful. He cuts too much away the first time. You stop him with a quiet word. Less waste, you say. Take only what won't carry. He nods, embarrassed for a moment, then steadier. A skill like this is learned in many small corrections. No one becomes a sorter by strength alone. The afternoon goes on in that patient manner, the floor slowly becoming more honest than the stack had been. Each opened mass of fiber loses its disguise the longer it stays in your hands. The better line settles into cleaner heaps. The doubtful material separates into clearer categories. And the reject pile, ugly but useful in its own way, becomes a record of all the shortcuts hidden in the original packing. When you handle enough of the damp portions together, another detail begins to show. The moisture is not spread evenly as river soaking would usually leave it. It sits in pockets, in patches that feel as if the jute dried once, then gathered wet again after bundling. That tells its own story. Not floodwater then, not some accident in the boat alone, more likely bad storage after retting, or bundles left in a low shed where night damp settled and had nowhere to leave. You mention it to the senior measurer when he comes by. He bends, takes up one of the heavier bunches, and presses it near the tied end. The fibers cling, then release with a soft tacky drag. Stored badly, he says, or covered before dry. You nod. That matters because it shifts blame in the quiet arithmetic of trade. If the jute had arrived damaged only by river travel, the fault might lie with transport or weather. But storage after drying suggests neglect farther upriver. Before sale, before dispatch, perhaps before the broker's mark touched the bale at all. No one rushes to name who did it. The warehouse is full of men who know that goods pass through many hands. Still, once the likely cause is spoken aloud, the consignment seems less like an accident and more like the end of a long chain of small, tolerated carelessness. You keep finding signs that support it. One bale has a center where the strands are slightly warmed in color, not by sun, but by close stacking. Another has faint mustiness only in the innermost fold, where air never moved enough. A third holds better fiber on top and common body below, but the lower part is tied in a way that suggests it was bundled separately first, then merged before pressing. These are not grand discoveries. They are little practical traces, yet they build a case more convincing than argument. The younger worker begins to notice them too. Why is this part darker only here? He asks, lifting a section from nearer Bale's heart. You show him where the fibers have lain folded against each other. No air, you say. See, outside dried, inside weighted. He rubs the strands and grimaces at the smell. Mill will know? Yes, you say. Mills always know in the end. That is one of the old truths of commodity work. A bale can be dressed for market, but it cannot be dressed forever. At some point it has to be processed. At some point it has to perform. The machines are less polite than brokers. They do not accept surface explanations. By the middle of the afternoon, the broker's representative returns. This time he comes more carefully, as if prepared to dislike what he will find. He has removed his light coat, and the heat has made his collar limp. He asks first for the samples. The tallyman hands over 3 small representative bunches laid in cloth, one from the better covering, one from the middling interior, and one from the dampest reject. The man turns each over with a clerk's precision, looking for grounds to soften the account. You can see the wish in him. If he can call the lot mixed but serviceable, if he can reduce the discrepancy to ordinary variation, perhaps the price damage will not spread so far. He asks, could the lower portions not be blended in if the outer line still carries the mark? You answer before anyone else does. If you blend this into first quality, the spinner pays for what is not there. He says nothing, so you go on, because plain speech is kinder here than polite uncertainty. The longer pale line will draw one way, the softer tender line will draw another. The rooty ends will thicken the batch. The damp weighs now but gives no value later. He looks toward the heaps as if hoping they might rearrange themselves into a friendlier truth. They may still use it. he says. Yes, you reply, but not as first. That distinction is the whole afternoon. Not ruin, not catastrophe, only accurate place. Much of the jute can still be sold. Much of it can still become cloth, bagging, backing, cordage, or other coarse goods that do not ask too much fineness. But the claim made by the outside layer has failed. And once that is accepted, all the papers tied to the lot have to shift a little. The representative asks what portion might remain in higher class if carefully selected. The senior measurer answers this time, enough to justify sorting, not enough to keep old grade. The man presses his lips together and asks for figures. No one can give exact figures yet, because the work is still underway. That frustrates him more than the downgrade itself. Clerks prefer a number, even a bad one, to a process still unfolding. But a go-down floor cannot always speak in numbers before it has finished speaking in heaps. So he has to wait. He kneels at last, perhaps because standing above the work has not improved it, and he takes a handful from one of the salvage piles. He asks you what the mills will notice first. You tell him. Uneven draw, you say. Breakage in weaker lengths. Waste from root. And feel. He glances up. Feel? Yes. Men in mills handle this too. Not the same as us, but enough. Badly stored fiber has a dead feel to it. He tests the handful again and, perhaps to his annoyance, begins to understand there is no use speaking around material once it is in the hand. He rises and says the office will accept reclassification if the samples are marked clearly and the tallies agree. That is not an apology, it is not praise. It is simply the point where dispute turns into paperwork. In Calcutta's jute trade, that is often as close to a verdict as anyone gets. When he leaves, the Sardar gives orders for the separated heaps to be counted more strictly. Fresh cloth markers are fetched, a clerk brings a new stick of chalk, and the tally slate becomes crowded with revisions. The old incoming count remains on one side, but now beside it grow new columns for better line, middling salvage, damp common, reject route, and sweepings. You do not love paperwork, but you respect it. Without written distinctions, careful sorting can be undone by lazy handling before dusk. So the heaps are measured again with the eye and hand. Bundles are pulled into more regular forms, so later men cannot say they were uncertain which was which. Samples are chosen not for beauty, but for truth. That may be the most delicate part of all. A sample must not flatter. It must not punish unfairly either. It should tell the average truth of the heap it represents. You crouch beside the better grade pile with the younger worker and show him how to choose. Not the longest, you say. Not the cleanest either. He looks confused. Then what? The most honest handful. He almost smiles at that. You gather a bunch from the middle of the heap, neither the top nor the most tempting edge. You shake it once, remove one obvious stray root end that belongs elsewhere, then tie the sample lightly. This is what they buy, you say? Not hope. This. Then you choose from the middling heap, then from the damp lower material. Each sample has to speak clearly enough that a buyer, touching only that small bundle, can imagine the larger body from which it came. That ability, too, is part of the sorter's craft, not just seeing grade, but selecting truth. The younger worker practices with your guidance. His first choice from the middling line is too generous. His second is too harsh, full of worse pieces from the edge, where rejected fiber drifted near. The third is nearly right. You accept it. He seems pleased, though he tries not to show it. The room settles into a new order. The shock of the reopened consignment has passed. Now there is only labor. A man sent from the office arrives with paper tags. Another brings fresh jute ties for rebinding later. The tally clerk consults with the senior measurer, then scratches amended descriptions that will travel with the lot. Your morning's private judgment is no longer private at all. It has become a chain of marks, bundles, delays, and reduced expectations. This is how a reputation forms in such work, not by speeches, by the kind of trouble your hands are willing to make. Some men are known for speed, some for making awkward lots disappear into averages, some for keeping brokers content, and some, though fewer, for being careful in a way that cannot be hurried or charmed out of itself. That kind of reputation is useful, but not always comfortable. It means more doubtful bales may find their way to you. It means certain clerks will sigh when your name is attached to a difficult lot. It also means mills learn to trust the marks that pass under your eye. All afternoon, without anyone saying it plainly, that truth grows around you. A handler carrying fresh ties pauses and says, half admiring, half tired, "You have made us all work today." You answer, "The Bale did that." He laughs once. "Yes, but your hands told on it." That is fair enough. The heat thickens. Dust clings to the sweat on your forearms and throat. The cloth at your mouth grows damp and has to be loosened, then tied again. Above, the fans continue their slow, uneven turning, stirring only enough air to keep the room from feeling entirely closed. In the brightest strips of afternoon light, tiny fibers drift and turn, rising when heaps are shaken, then settling again on ledges, shoulders, and floor. The work grows quieter in another way too. Once the broker's man has seen enough and the repricing has begun on paper, the need for talk falls away. No one has to persuade anymore. You only have to finish. And finishing in a Godown is its own long discipline. Every strand has to go somewhere. Every category has to be kept clean of the next. The youngest men want to hurry now, because the broad result seems settled. But this is when hurry does the most harm. A few bad handfuls dropped into the wrong rebundled lot can undo an hour's care, so you keep your voice calm and your eye sharp. When the younger worker reaches across one heap and lets a rough clump fall too near the salvage line, you stop him. He apologizes at once. You show him how to move around the piles, not over them. Keep the heaps from touching, you say. Once they touch too much, men remember badly. He nods, and from then on, he circles with more patience. Memory matters in a room full of material spread over a floor. Clerks may write tags, but workers remember by shape, by position, by the look of one heap against another. If the boundaries blur, uncertainty returns. So you become almost fussy about edges. Straighten this ridge, shift that darker bundle farther away. Trim the loose root from the footpath before someone drags it elsewhere on his sole. These are small acts. They are also what keep the afternoon from dissolving into confusion. As the sun lowers a little, a runner comes from the office with word that one mill order, expected to take this lot as better line, will now be filled only in part. The rest must come from another stock already in storage. That means tomorrow's labor changes too. Other bales will have to be opened earlier than planned. Another sorter may inherit a shorter morning because of what you found today. This is the way consequences travel in trade. Never alone, always attached to the next decision. The tallyman tells you this while checking the revised columns. You nod, not because the news surprises you, but because it confirms how far one careful morning can reach. A changed grade is not just a changed price. It is a changed route through the city's warehouses and mills. A changed loading order. A changed note in someone's book. A changed expectation in a spinning room where men may not know your name, but will handle fiber you prevented from being misnamed. The younger worker asks what happens to the downgraded portions. You tell him what you know. Some will still go to mills that make coarser goods. Some may be blended carefully into lower classes where the weakness does not overpromise. The worst rooty and stained parts may end as sweepings, stuffing, rough packing uses, or other humble fates. Very little in such trades is entirely thrown away. Material usually finds its level. The problem comes only when men try to sell one level as another. That answer seems to satisfy him. He has the simplicity of someone still new enough to believe that everything belongs somewhere if only older hands will name the place. There is comfort in that belief. Often it is true, the real disorder begins when place and label drift apart. You sort on. The piles grow more compact as they are refined. What was once one suspicious consignment has become a small geography of use. This clean long line for one buyer. This fair middling body for another, this common damp portion for lower class, if accepted, This reject for whatever use can bear it. And in the middle of that geography move men with hooks, knives, tags, slates, and tired hands, making sure the day's truth can survive the evening's rebinding. By now, the younger worker can identify over-softness with some confidence. You test him. You pick up 2 handfuls that look almost alike, pale enough to fool a clerk in haste. He handles the first and says, "Better." Then the second. He hesitates, looks same, but weak here. He touches the lower half where the retting went too far, too tender. You nod. That is enough. He seems taller after that, though of course he is not. Competence has a way of straightening a person from the inside. A little later, one of the handlers brings over a bundle from the newly separated damp common pile and asks whether it can be trimmed into salvage. You test it and shake your head. The root is too thick, the body too uneven, and the smell too stale. If you save that, you tell him you make the better heap lie. He accepts the judgment without complaint. That is another sign of the day's change. Earlier there was impatience around your caution. Now the room has adjusted to it. By late afternoon your standards are no longer an interruption. They have become the rule by which everyone nearby is working. The broker's representative comes once more, briefly, to collect the tagged samples and confirm that the lot will be repriced before dispatch. His tone is flatter now, less resistance, more bookkeeping. He asks whether the goods can still leave by evening. The Sardar says, "Some of them." That answer contains the whole practical consequence, not total stoppage, only division. Some portions are ready for honest movement. Others still need binding, weighing, or a revised mark. The representative notes this and leaves for good. When he is gone, the Godown seems gentler. There is no more audience, only work. You begin preparing the refined heaps for rebinding. This changes the body of the labor again. Sorting is all spread and separation. Binding is gathering and order. Men who have spent hours opening and shaking now turn to compressing, aligning, and making loose truth transportable. The better line is drawn together in armfuls. Bundles are turned, so the cleaner ends lie mostly one way. Hands and knees press the mass inward, while fresh ties are passed beneath. The sound changes from rustle to strain, fiber tightening, cloth sliding, twine pulled hard. You join this part too, because a bundle badly tied can mix itself again before it reaches the next stop. You kneel on one side of a gathered pile, while a handler presses from the other. The younger worker feeds in loose lengths that belong with this grade and not the next. You pull the tie across, flatten the top with your forearm, then tighten until the bundle holds. Not too tight. Too much pressure bruises and distorts. Not too loose either. Loose bundles spread, fray, and tempt carelessness. The art is in enough firmness to travel, enough gentleness to keep the grade readable when opened later. You make the younger worker redo one tie that sits crooked. He groans softly, then corrects it. If the tie is wrong, you say, the mark is wasted. It is a simple lesson. Goods speak first by shape, then by tag. A disorderly bundle tells lies before anyone touches the chalk. One by one, the fresh bundles take form. They are smaller than the original seller's bales because these are no longer broad claims but more precise portions. Each receives a temporary chalk note. Best selected line from opened lot. Middling salvage. Common damp. Reject root and shorts. The clerk will later standardize the wording, but for now the meaning matters more than elegance. You help choose where each set should be stacked. Keep unlike grades apart. Keep the damp common where air can still move around it. Keep the better line away from the reject, because smell and sight travel in storage as well as moisture does. The Godown teaches practical morality. Good and bad need distance. The more you finish, the more evident the day's changed reputation becomes. Men who had muttered about delay now bring you uncertain handfuls and ask, "This one where?" Not because they cannot decide at all, but because they want the room's final categories to remain consistent. That is authority of a modest sort. You have not become important, only reliable. In a warehouse, that can be enough to shape the whole tone of an afternoon. The tallyman, who guarded his slate so carefully in the morning, has by now accepted that dust will cover everything and has given up trying to keep his cuffs clean. He reads the revised count aloud to the clerk from the office. The figures are provisional, but the pattern is clear. The better line is smaller than the seller's marks implied. The middling body is larger. The damp and rooty reject is substantial enough that no one can pretend it was a minor accident. The clerk asks whether the percentages should be written now. The senior measurer says, after final binding. Even at this stage, no one sensible wants to overstate precision before the heaps are secured and weighed. Trade likes exactness, but good workers know the difference between measured accuracy and premature neatness. As the afternoon wears on, the floor itself begins to reappear. The sea of loose jute shrinks. Open planks emerge between the rebundled stacks. Sweepings gather in corners. The day's disorder has not vanished, but it has been made legible. That may be the best a Godown ever hopes for. Not perfection, only order enough for truth to travel. You take a moment to stretch your back. The ache sits between your shoulders like a folded cloth. Familiar, not sharp, just the body's quiet account of hours spent bent over fiber. You roll one wrist, then the other, and look at the rebundled stacks as if seeing them from a step farther away. What had been one neat claim in the morning has become several smaller truths, each one less flattering and more useful. That is often how sorting ends, not with a single answer, but with a room divided into honest portions. A fresh set of ties is brought from the back, coarse and slightly stiff, and you test them by pulling one against your palm. Good ties matter now. A weak one can loosen by cart time, and if a loosened bundle spills into its neighbor, all the afternoon's care begins to blur. So you sort the ties almost as carefully as you sorted the fiber. The frayed ones go aside for lesser use. The stronger ones are saved for the better grades. No one writes songs about this part. Still, the trade depends on it. A bundle is not finished because the grade is known. It is finished when that grade can survive movement. You crouch beside the next heap of selected line and begin to gather the loose ends inward. The better fiber has a pleasant obedience to it. It lies flatter. It aligns more willingly when you shake it once and draw it together. The commoner material resists, catching and crossing, as if even now it cannot quite stop betraying what it is. You have felt that difference all day. By evening, it becomes almost comforting. The hand knows before the eye confirms. A handler kneels opposite you. He presses with both forearms while you pass the first tie under the belly of the bundle with a hooked stick. The younger worker feeds in a few stray lengths from the edge. You stop him when one darker tuft slips near the top. Not there, you say. He pulls it back at once. A small correction. Still, that is how a bundle keeps its name. You tighten the tie in two pulls. The first takes the slack, the second brings resistance, then a dry tightening sound as the jute settles into itself. You knot low and flat so the cord will not bite too harshly into the outer layer. Then you turn the bundle slightly and add another tie farther down. Even spacing matters. It keeps the pressure true. If one end is compressed harder than the other, the whole piece travels badly. The clerk from the office comes over with paper tags and a brush for marking. He holds himself a little back from the dust, though by now there is no real clean place left in the room. What shall this one carry? He asks. You answer without looking up. Selected from reopened lot. Better line only. He repeats the words as he writes them on his pad, then asks the measurer whether the broker's mark should remain. The older man considers for a breath. Keep original mark, he says, but add reopened and resorted. That is another small consequence. The lot will not lose its history. Its first name stays with it, but so does the correction. Somewhere later, in another Godown or a mill store, someone will see that amended mark and know that this shipment had to be read twice. You are glad of that. Paper should remember what hands discovered. The next bundles are from the middling salvage. This work is less graceful. The fiber is shorter, more variable, and wants to spring into uneven loops as you gather it. You trim a few root-heavy portions away even now, because finishing often reveals faults. The broad sorting missed. Nothing dramatic. Just the last small honesty of the job. A good sorter knows that first decisions are rarely the final ones. Some truths only appear when a heap is compressed and its hidden edges show again. The younger worker asks why you keep checking what has already been checked. You tell him because a pile changes when it becomes a bundle. He looks down at the half-made package in your hands. The words settle slowly. Then he nods. In the loose heap, faults can hide by dispersing. In the tightened form, they gather. This is true of fiber and of many other things. A strong root clump that seemed harmless on the floor becomes obvious when it bulges through a tied side. A damp patch that was lost in spread jute grows cool and heavy once the rest is pressed around it. You find both before the next knot is closed. One clump you pull and toss to the lower grade, one darker, cool handful you lay aside for a separate, damp, common bundle. That, too, changes the tally. The clerk sighs softly when he sees another revision coming. Not in anger, only with the tiredness of a man who hoped the numbers had settled. You almost smile, but do not. This is not the hour for teasing. Instead you say, "Better now than after loading." He nods. Yes, always better now. There is something soothing in the repetition of such remarks. They are plain truths, said by tired men, and because they are plain, they calm the room more than argument ever could. Near the doorway, weights are being prepared. A beam scale is wiped down with a rag, though the rag itself is dusty. The floor beneath is cleared as well as possible. Weighing after regrading is a slower business than the morning count would have been. The original bale weights no longer mean enough on their own. Now each new portion has to justify itself in mass, as well as in appearance. Fiber that carried hidden moisture in the morning may still weigh generously. That is one more reason not to flatter it. You carry the first finished bundle to the weighing place with another man. It is awkward, not impossibly heavy, but dense enough to drag at the forearms. You set it on the scale platform, and the weigher shifts the counterweight with practiced little movements. He calls out the figure. The clerk repeats it and writes. Then the weigher presses down once with his palm on the top of the bundle, feeling not the exact weight now, but the kind of hold it has. Well tied, he says. That is all. Yet from him, it is approval. Men at scales often speak as sparingly as sorters. Too many words make figures feel less trustworthy. One by one, the bundles come. Better line first, then middling salvage, then the common damp material which draws more scrutiny because extra moisture can lend false heaviness. You watch the weighing of those more carefully. The weigher notices. He lifts one bundle slightly, shifts it, then looks at you. Cool inside? A little. He grunts. The clerk writes an extra note. Stored damp fiber can cost a buyer twice, once in price and again in disappointment after drying. No one wants a later claim that the goods shrank in value once the water forgot to stay. So the notes become careful around those bundles. Not poetic, not accusatory, only careful. That is the language of trade when truth finally wins. By now, the late sun has started to change the light entering the Godown. It is no cooler yet, but it is less white. The brightness near the doorway turns honey-colored where it strikes floating dust. The long walls give back a softer heat. And the noise of the lane outside changes from the hard business of midday to the layered sounds of evening trade. Wheels, vendors, distant tram bells, men calling shorter messages because they are tired too. Inside, your own room is narrowing toward closure, though not toward rest. There is still much to finish. The reject pile must be made useful in the limited way rejects are useful. Sweepings must be gathered. Twine scraps have to be coiled, not left to tangle underfoot. The chalk marks on fresh bundles need checking before dusk makes one word look too much like another. The younger worker is sent to fetch a small oil lamp for the tally desk, in case the light fails before the books are balanced. He returns with the lamp and with 2 cups of tea balanced in one hand. One is for you, The tea is hotter than before and sweeter, perhaps because the seller knows men buy patience as much as refreshment late in the day. You take a careful sip. Dust sits on the rim. You drink anyway. The sweetness wakes the mouth, but the body remains slow and even. This is not the kind of fatigue that sharpens into excitement. It is the long, woolly tiredness of repetition. Almost gentle if you do not resist it. You stand with the cup in your hand and look at the reject material more closely. Root-heavy jute has its own rough look. The lower ends thicken and splay, and the strands lose that neat parallel habit good line keeps. There are bark fragments here, and hardened bits from poor stripping, and a few darkened clumps that should never travel under a promising mark again. Still, even this pile is not without fate. Some of it may be bought at a low price for rougher use. Some may be cut down further. Some may become what men politely call waste, though industry often finds one more purpose for waste before it truly lets it go. A boy from the office comes to ask whether the reject should be tagged separately or merely counted under low common. The senior measurer says, separate. You agree? If reject is hidden under a softer name, then the whole day teaches nothing. So another tag is written. Another heap acquires its own identity. This is how the afternoon's honesty keeps extending itself, even into the least impressive corners of the floor. The younger worker, having finished his tea too quickly, crouches beside you and asks what made you notice the first bale. It is a simple question. You answer simply, it held together wrong. He waits, expecting more. So you give him more. The outside was dry in the hand, but not alive. Then the middle clung. Good line falls cleaner. He picks up a small stray twist of better fiber and lets it slide through his fingers. Then he takes a harsher bit from the reject pile and feels that too. You know before you know, he says quietly. You glance at him. Sometimes that is about as close as a sorter comes to speaking of instinct. What people call instinct is often only memory stored in the hand. Years of touching material lay down a kind of quick understanding beneath words. You are not guessing when you feel a wrongness. You are comparing against hundreds of mornings, hundreds of bales, thousands of handfuls that taught your fingers what ordinary truth feels like. The city around you rarely notices such knowledge. It notices delayed consignments. It notices amended prices. It notices when mills complain, but the hidden education of touch remains mostly invisible. That does not make it less real. If anything, it makes it more intimate. The next task is marking. Once bundles are weighed and tied, they have to be named clearly enough for men not present today. A cartman tomorrow morning should not have to infer what a sorter meant this afternoon. A warehouse receiver across town should be able to look once and understand enough to place the bundle where it belongs. So chalk and brush come out again. The clerk marks on cloth tags when he can. On some bundles, where the surface lies flat enough, he writes directly on the tie band. You check several and ask him to rewrite one where the word middling has blurred into something softer. He wipes it with a damp rag and marks it again. Language matters here because small differences in wording travel into money. Selected line is not the same as first quality. Reopened and resorted says more than checked. Damp common says more than lower grade. The trade survives on such narrow phrases. Each one must bear exactly the burden it can support. As the marked bundles are carried to their new stacks, the geometry of the Godown changes again. The original suspicious row has vanished entirely now. In its place stand separate little districts of fiber, tighter, lower, more numerous, each with its own future. One stack waits for a buyer willing to accept selected upper portions at a reduced but still respectable rate. One stack will be offered as middling salvage. One sits apart for common damp stock, where expectations will be lower and the price lower still. The reject remains near the wall, humble and slightly untidy despite your efforts, because some material never learns to stand attractively. You find that honest too. Not everything improves by arrangement. The tallyman begins reading entries back against the physical stacks. This is tedious work and therefore necessary. He calls the original mark, then the new subdivisions, then the count of bundles under each. The office clerk checks his own notes. The weigher adds corrected masses where late trimming changed a piece. You listen while coiling cut twine into a neat loop, ready to interrupt if a spoken figure sounds wrong. One does. The middling salvage count is given one bundle too high. You look up at once. No, you say. One move to damp common. The clerk flips back through his notes. He finds the correction made quickly an hour earlier and almost buried under other changes. He nods and amends the line. That is how errors sneak back in at the end of a long day. Not through villainy, often, but through fatigue. If no one catches them, the paperwork slowly undoes the flaw's honesty. So you keep listening. You must be almost as careful with spoken numbers as with fiber. By this hour, your hands move automatically through smaller tasks. You trim a loose tie end. You straighten a sample bundle. You shake dust from the cloth used to separate heaps. You pull a stray root clump from under the scale. These are the quiet motions of closure, though the day is not closed yet. A warehouse never really leaps from full labor to rest. It thins. It simplifies. It gives up one type of noise for another. The younger worker is sent to sweep around the newly stacked bundles. He begins too vigorously, raising a light cloud of fiber dust. You stop him and take the broom for a moment. Short strokes, you say, low, or you'll put the floor back into the air. He watches as you show him. Even sweeping in a Godown has a method. Loose jute and dust are not like household dirt. They catch, drift, rise, and settle again wherever air invites them. So you ease the broom forward in shallow pushes, gathering root bits, bark flakes, thread ends, and fine sweepings into a manageable line. Then he resumes, gentler. No one teaches such things in books, yet every trade has these small right ways that make work feel calm instead of clumsy. A message comes from the office that the altered mill order has been confirmed. Another stock from a different district and a more trustworthy mark will be opened at first light tomorrow to make up the shortfall. You hear this while checking the sample ties, and the news enters your mind without surprise. Of course, tomorrow has already changed. Days in the jute trade lean into one another. A false covering in the morning becomes revised loading by evening, and fresh sorting before dawn the next day. Nothing stays contained inside its own hour for long. The senior measurer says, then they will want the selected line out first. The tallyman makes a note. The stack nearest dispatch is adjusted accordingly. Practical consequences have their own quiet dignity. No one gives speeches. Men just move bundles. The broker's representative sends back one final instruction as dusk begins to gather. The sample cloths are to be kept tied to the top bundles overnight, not filed away, because a buyer may want to inspect again at opening. That means you must choose where they lie. Too exposed, and they gather dust or confusion. Too hidden, and morning hands may miss them. So you tuck each sample securely beneath the upper tie of its corresponding bundle, with enough of the cloth tail showing to be found at once. Another little act of future-proofing. You find yourself thinking, not for the first time, that much of warehouse skill consists in helping absent men understand what happened when they were not there. A mark, a tie, a sample, a careful stack, these are all messages sent forward. The light slips lower. The lamp on the tally desk is lit. Its flame is small and a little smoky at first, then steadier once the wick is trimmed. Under that yellow glow, the slate marks look paler. The edges of the room soften. Dust still floats, but now only near the lamp and the doorway, where the last of the day meets the first of the evening. You return to the floor where the original sorting spread had covered nearly everything. Now there is space enough to see the planks again. They are streaked with dust where heaps lay all afternoon. Here and there a few golden strands still cling in cracks, bright against old timber. The room feels larger for having been emptied, though in truth it holds almost as much material as before. Order changes space. You gather the discarded knife cuttings, little twine lengths, and broken cloth scraps into one hand. The bale hook, which did so much work in the morning and then seemed to vanish into the day's wider labor, is leaning against a post where you left it. You pick it up and wipe its point on a rag. Metal, too, carries the day on its surface. The curve is dull with use. The handle has darkened from many palms. Tools at this hour feel almost companionable. They do not talk. They simply wait where they are put, ready to repeat tomorrow what they did today. A cartman appears at the entrance and asks whether any portion of the resorted lot can go out tonight after all. The Sardar steps over and looks at the nearest selected stack. Some, he says again, but not mixed. The cartman nods. He does not need more. By now the day's lesson has spread beyond the sorting floor into the practical speech of everyone involved. Not mixed. It is a simple phrase, yet it contains the whole argument, the whole labor, the whole changed price. The first small loading begins. Only the clearly selected line, properly tied, marked, weighed, and separated, is allowed toward the door. You walk beside the first bundle as two men lift it. Not because you distrust them exactly, but because the first movement of a corrected lot deserves watching. If a tag slips or a bundle is set near the wrong stack, confusion can begin all over again. The men carry it in that rolling warehouse way, shifting the weight between them without hurry. At the doorway, the fading light touches the pale fibers and makes them glow warmer than they are. For a moment, almost, they look like the handsome outside of the morning bales. Then the mark catches your eye, reopened, resorted, and the illusion passes. That feels right. Beauty with memory is better than beauty with deception. The selected bundles are set apart for loading order, but the full dispatch will not be completed tonight. There is not enough light, not enough time, and too much caution now attached to the lot. So the Sardar decides the remaining movement will wait until morning, after one final check of tags and samples. No one objects. Even the impatient men have grown used to the slower truth of this consignment. Sometimes the room itself teaches patience by refusing every shortcut offered to it. The younger worker returns the broom and asks whether he should sweep beneath the reject stack as well. You say yes, but tell him to leave the reject undisturbed. Its roughness should remain visible. He glances at you, understanding more than the task requires. A hidden reject becomes tomorrow's trouble. A visible reject stays where it belongs. He crouches and works carefully around the edges, gathering only what is loose. The sweepings go into a separate sack. Even the floor dust has value enough to be kept distinct from ordinary rubbish. That fact always seems to surprise newcomers. They imagine waste as something simple. Industry teaches otherwise. There are levels even to what falls under the hand. The tally books are nearly closed now. The office clerk sits on a low stool by the lamp, adding one line beneath another while the senior measurer checks his shoulder from time to time. You hear fragments as you pass. Bits of it are only figures, weights shifted from one column to another, and bits of it are words that will follow the bundles farther than any of you do. You catch phrases like selected from reopened lot, and common damp not for hire line, and held over until morning dispatch. That is the final shape of the day. Not anger, not triumph. Just language becoming careful because your hands were careful first. You set the coiled twine beside the post and take up the broom again for one last pass where you worked at dawn. The floor there is marked by the whole day in faint signs. Dust lies thicker where the first suspicious heaps were built. A few root ends remain near the cracks in the planks. One tiny pale strand clings to a splinter, almost bright in the lamplight, as if it still believes it belongs with the best line. You ease it free and drop it where it truly belongs. That is the mood now. Everything in its proper place, or as near to it as tired men can manage. The younger worker brings the sack for sweepings, and together you gather the remains that no buyer will inspect closely. Bark flakes, short broken fibers, jute dust mixed with old dust, little cut lengths from ties. Even here, the sorting instinct continues. You do not mix the clean, dry sweepings with the mustier scrap from the damp pile. One can still be sold for humble use, the other will only lower it. He notices that you keep making these distinctions, even at the very end. And he says, almost with wonder, you never stop sorting. You lean on the broom for a moment and answer him honestly. The work does not stop because the bale is gone. He nods, and perhaps he understands a little more than the words alone explain. In this trade, the day keeps speaking after the floor has quieted. A careless bundle can tell on you tomorrow. A false note can turn into an argument next week. A properly chosen sample can save a long dispute in some office where no one was here to smell the damp for himself. That is why the last minutes matter. The senior measurer rises stiffly from beside the clerk's stool and walks the stacks one final time. You go with him. Together, you check the chalk marks, touching each bundle lightly, not to test the fiber now, but to make sure the ties have held and the labels still read true in poor light. The selected line stack is sound. The middling salvage is in fair order. The damp common pile is still set apart, with air on both sides. The reject heap remains unmistakable, as it should. He pauses at the samples tucked under the upper ties and adjusts one cloth tail so it shows more clearly. Then he says, "Mourning men should not have to guess." It is a simple sentence. Still, it feels like the summary of the whole profession. Most good warehouse work is done so that the next pair of hands does not have to guess. You move to the weighing place where the beam scale has finally gone still. All day it shifted and settled, carrying one corrected truth after another. Now the counterweight hangs quiet. The platform is swept. Only a faint mat of fiber dust remains in the grain of the wood. You wipe the metal arm once more with a cloth, because moisture from the river air will creep in overnight if no one minds it. Then you place the cloth over the beam. A small act. But workshops and godowns are full of small acts that say tomorrow matters too. Near the door, the first selected bundles for early loading have been set in a neat short row. They look calmer than the original bales looked. Less grand, perhaps. Less impressive to a man who wants large claims and quick dispatch, but more believable. The cloth tags hang plainly, the ties sit even. Nothing is dressed up beyond what it can support. You find that restful. A carter who will return before sunrise steps in to look over what has been kept ready. He squints at the amended marks, rubs his chin, and says, "So this is what remains of the urgent lot." You answer, "This is what was in it." He gives a tired little smile at that, not mocking, only acknowledging the difference. Then he spits into the lane, not in the godown, and says he will come early before the heat. When he is gone, the Sardar begins sending men off in twos and threes. There is no speech, no formal ending. One man takes his rolled cloth from a nail. Another washes his face at a bucket near the yard. The clerk closes the book at last and blows gently on the page where the last wet line of ink still shines. The lamp flame makes the edges of his fingers gold. Then he shuts the cover. That sound, soft and flat, tells you more clearly than anything else that the day is nearly done. You carry the bale hook and the knife back to their place. The knife is wiped before it goes down. The hook is hung with its curve turned inward, so no one brushing past in morning dimness will catch a leg on it. You set your tally slate beside them, though its chalk is no longer your morning list. The old incoming confidence has been rubbed away and replaced with corrections, arrows, extra notes, and one thickened line beneath the lot mark where the trouble began. The slate looks lived in, useful, a little tired, like the room. By now the air from the river has started to enter more freely through the open side. It comes cooler than the day, though still warm enough to carry the city's dust. You can smell the hoolie in it. Mud, water, boats, distant smoke. And beneath all of that, still, the sweet dry scent of jute dust that has settled into your clothes and skin. When you rub your thumb against your fingertips, you can still feel the drag of fiber there. Some trades stay on the hands after washing. This is one of them. The younger worker stands beside the doorway, hesitating, as if he wants to ask one more question before leaving. At last he does. Will the broker remember this lot? You look back at the resorted stacks. Yes, You say, not forever, but for a while. That is usually how memory works in commerce. A man is known for a season as careful or careless or lucky or troublesome. A district gains a reputation, then loses it, then gains another when the crop changes or the buyers change. A broker's mark may carry trust for years until one bad run loosens it. Nothing in the trade is completely fixed. Still, a day like this leaves a trace. The office will remember the repricing. The mill will remember that the first expected grade did not arrive in full. The men on the floor will remember who insisted on opening the whole line. And some future doubtful bale may be handled more slowly because of what happened here. The younger worker takes that in quietly. Then he goes. The room is much larger after the others begin to leave. Not empty, not yet, but expanded by fewer bodies and fewer voices. The Sardar checks the side door latch. The senior measurer folds his cloth and drapes it over one shoulder. The clerk carries the closed book away from the dust with more tenderness than he gave his cuffs that morning. You remain a little longer, because there are always the last little things. A twisted tie near the wall, a sample cloth corner hanging too low, a loose bit of bark caught under the edge of a selected bundle. These are not reasons to delay a man forever, only reasons to leave without regret. You make those corrections. Then you stand still for a moment in the middle of the Godown. At dawn, this place was one urgent stack and one suspicious touch. Now it is several named truths, waiting for separate fates. The day's labor has not made the jute better than it was. It has only stopped it from pretending. There is something almost tender in that. So much of industrial life depends on hidden acts of honesty by people no ledger fully sees. A jute sorter in 1920s Calcutta was not a famous kind of worker. He stood between field and mill, between boat and broker, in a dusty room by the river. He read bundles by hand. He separated what could still serve from what should not be flattered. He changed values without ever touching money. He altered schedules without leaving the warehouse floor. And most days, if he did his work well enough, almost no one spoke of him at all. That is part of the quiet beauty of such labor. It does not ask for applause. It asks for steadiness, for memory in the fingers, for patience when a bale wants to lie, for enough self-respect to slow a whole room rather than let a false surface pass. Outside, evening has deepened. The lane sounds softer now, fewer wheels, more voices going home, a distant bell, a call from the river. The light at the doorway has turned from gold to a grey blue that makes the stacks inside seem warmer by contrast. You walk once more past the selected bundles waiting for early dispatch, past the middling salvage, past the common damp set apart with its warning written plainly, past the reject heap, honest in its roughness. You know where each one will likely go, and also that trade has its own surprises. A mill order may shift again overnight. A buyer may insist on new inspection. Morning humidity may change the feel of the damp stock enough to renew argument. Nothing is ever finally settled just because the books are closed. The Sardar puts out one lamp and leaves the tally desk light burning a little longer. Its glow reaches only partway across the room. The rest is already shadow. In that softer half-dark, the bundles lose some of their sharp differences to the eye. Pale line and middling line begin to resemble one another again from a distance. But your hands would still know. That is the last private comfort of the day. Appearance softens in evening light. Touch remembers. You lift your cloth from your neck and shake out some of the dust before folding it. A faint brown cloud falls and disappears against the planks. Your shoulders ache. Your wrists are tired. Under your nails there is still a trace of the floor. It is an ordinary kind of fatigue. Not heroic, not miserable. The body simply keeping account of honest repetition. And because the work demanded close attention all day, the tiredness feels oddly clean. You did not hurry where hurry would have blurred things. You did not let urgency speak louder than evidence. You did not improve the lot with language. You only named what was there. As you step toward the door, the senior measurer says, without looking up from the last stack he is checking, "Good catch this morning." It is the nearest thing to praise the day will offer. You answer, "It was in the Bale." He gives a small sound that might be agreement, and that is enough. In such places, dignity is often shared by refusing to make too much of what had to be done. You step out into the river air. Behind you, the Godown settles. The lamp inside is turned lower. The brick holds the day's warmth. The dust begins to sink. Tomorrow, another lot will come in from the districts. More coarse ties, more pale surfaces, more hidden middles. The trade will go on, as it always does, fed by river, field, sweat, paper, and the old human habit of trying to improve a bargain before it is touched too closely. And somewhere in that continuing flow, because of today, a clerk may look harder at a mark, a broker may ask one more question, a sorter may open one more bale than convenience prefers. That is how change really moves in a place like this. Quietly, by hand, by repetition, by memory. The workshop is almost still now. The scale is covered, the hook is hung up, the knife is clean. The bundles are marked, the doubtful lot has been divided into what it truly was. Only the night watch of dust remains, settling over timber and twine and chalk, and beyond the open side, the hoolie